So we're going to start by basically providing a little bit of, hold on, I can't get my seat in, a little bit of background to our tag, and I'm going to use just distress ink for doing that. Then I plan to add maybe a little bit of stenciling, and then beyond that we'll start moving into the stamping. I have cut a couple of tags from paper. They're about, I think, 5 3/4 long, and they're 3 inches wide. So one at a time, I have brought myself out some new ink blending sponges so that we can try to make it look nice. And I'm going to throw a spanner in the works by introducing different colours of distress ink. I've got Tattered Rose, which is a very pale pink, and Weathered Wood, which is a kind of pale bluey grey. I'm not using them both on the one tag. I'm going to use one on one tag and one on the other. So we'll start with the Tattered Rose, and we'll see what kind of coverage it gets us. Now, in an ideal world, it's very pale, in an ideal world, what you do when you're applying distress ink is, now I've told you this before, you don't lean very heavily when you're introducing your colour. You come in from the side and basically put down your layer of colour gently. If you do it, if you lean heavy, you'll give yourself kind of swirly marks, obviously, because you're moving in a circular motion. So try and keep it fairly light-handed, at a wee bit of an angle when you're first coming on in particular, and just swirl away. I don't want this to be, it really doesn't need to be dark in any way, because if it's dark it will start to give us all sorts of problems in terms of our subsequent stamping and our using the stencils. In these particular tags, what my intention is that they're not going to have such a real focal point. I think what I would prefer to do is introduce just a basic ephemera type tag that doesn't have anything in particular on it as a centrepiece. We can work on that later in this wee series. I'm not sure how long the series will be. It really depends on how much I can think of to do. But you can combine all sorts of different things. You can combine your stamping with your ephemera layers, you know, when you're putting your pictures on. It all adds to the interest. Right, so I've got 2 stencils I've looked out here. I'm not going to use them both on this one particular tag, there isn't any need. I think in this one I'll use the Tim Holtz kind of, I'm not sure what it is, it's got a wee number down the bottom, which ITH MS032. It was part of a 3 stencil set. And this, to be fair, I think this was the reason I bought it, because this was the one that was, I reckoned I would be using the most. I haven't said that I don't use it that much, but it's the kind of mini version, because you can buy a fuller, a bigger one. Right, now, all I'm planning on doing here is just adding sections of this to my background. I don't want to slap it right in the middle and have that as my whole middle, because the whole thing about the layering is it's different little sections of stuff that's going to just build up the ultimate background, if you like. So the other thing to bear in mind is, see when you've got an edge, like, let me try and show it against the white one, this here will provide a straight edge to your tag. so, or to your design rather, and I don't like it. I much prefer if you get a kind of central part of this. I think it looks more natural, more kind of organic, if you like. So let's get some of our ink, and again we're still using our tattered rose, so we don't need to invest in 8 million different distress inks, and very, very gently swirling, because I don't want to provide a dark background with this, and I don't want to hit the end there because I don't want a straight line down my tag. So I'm just going to add up here, and you'll see it's very, very faint, and I'll add a bit down the bottom here, and again avoiding the side because I don't want to have that straight line down the tag. The other thing, when you're using the ink blending tool with a stencil like this, it's very, very easy to move the stencil, so you need to be very careful and be fairly light-handed. I've done it a couple of times here where a bit of the stencil's coming up like that. I mean, to be honest, I would prefer to darken that a wee bit, but I don't know if I'll be able to line it up again. What I might do is just add another wee bit down the bottom here, on the other side. Try and hold your stencil in position so that you're not moving it, because obviously you just don't get your pattern if you move it. Ouch, wow, my nail caught it there. Right, that'll do us. Right, so that's us for the stencil. Just try and, hopefully you'll see that okay a minute to have a look. Yeah, that's fine. Right, so we can start moving into the stamping side of things. Now, in terms of ink for stamping, distress ink is it's water soluble, and it doesn't give a clear impression. So it's alright if all you want to do is maybe have a kind of smudgy background or something. I do want a background, but I don't want necessarily a really smudgy one. You know, I would quite like a measure of what I'm stamping to be visible. So what I tend to use is VersaFine, which describes itself as capturing fine detail like no other, and it does. I mean, I must admit, I think it's a really, really good ink. Vintage Sepia is what I'm going to use for this pink tag. In terms of stamping, I've pointed this out before. The stamps, these particular stamps I'm going to use on this, are all what's called photopolymer. They're the plastic kind of clear see-through ones, so they don't have a cushion on them, and it helps get a better impression if you have something like a mouse mat below your stamping, so that when you put it down it cushions it a bit, and you know, just basically if you don't use it and you tend to press it down, if you press it that wee bit too hard, your photopolymer stamps squish a wee bit and you get a kind of blurry a vision of what you're making. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to add text. If there's one thing, actually I don't think that's going to be, is that going to be big enough? I can't be big enough for this. The one thing I would recommend everybody has in their stamping arsenal is a text stamp. They're invaluable, quite frankly. They really are. They're brilliant for providing background. Always very, very worthwhile to get a text stamp, because it can just do so much. Now, the other thing I want to do here is, on my first layer of stamping, I don't want it to be really, really dark. So what I'm going to do is what's called stamping off, and effectively I'm going to use my paper to do my first impression, so that when I go to stamp on this it will be a paler brown. That way I don't need to buy two inks. You can also, I mean, obviously stamp it off twice, and that way you'll get a really, really a really pale impression. I also don't need it to necessarily be completely central. The whole point of this is that you kind of stagger things about a wee bit. So we'll put that there, and we won't get a phenomenal impression, but we don't want that. All we're looking for is something to provide more of the background in this. The other thing I always recommend is take your ink to your stamp as opposed to your stamp to your ink. It's easier to not over ink if you do little taps. What I really hate seeing is people who come along and go like that, because ink on these will it'll smear. The impression of what you get, you'll not notice it in this because it's just a wee text. Oh goodness, my phone. Hold on a second. Really sorry about that. They actually hung up. We have a thing called call guardian, which means they need to announce who they are if they're not, you know, their number's not held in the memory of the phone. Basically to stop sales calls, because at one point we were getting an awful lot of them. Right, so back to our stamping. So stamp once, stamp twice, and stagger this down here. And that'll do us. It doesn't need to be a phenomenal impression. All we are looking for is a bit of background. And that's my fourth impression. Right, that's fine for that. Now we need to pick what else we're going to use here. Put that stamp back there. Now the ones I'm going to use are, it's a series of, they're kind of like French, I don't know what they are, they're taken from perhaps letters or headings, and there's some coins and things like that, and they're just an interesting, it's just interesting images to build up an overall picture. Now because we have used the paler, having stamped off that vintage sepia, we can introduce this darker, and by darker I mean take the first impression, and it can go on top of some of the stuff that we have already stamped, and it shouldn't provide any blurring or anything like that. It should give you a reasonable image and impression. And you just basically are going to be working here at building up a background of stamps. Again, they don't all need to be first impressions. You can stamp these off as well if you want, to give you a that's pretty pale. Wait a minute, I'll go and stamp that one again somewhere else. It all just adds up to provide a background that you can, if you so desire, add a focal image to, or you can just use it as it is. We'll cover everything in that respect. There, I've done something I shouldn't have. And the good thing about this particular stamp set, which I think I either got through eBay or somebody like Wish or AliExpress, it's got a lot of different stamps in it, so it's really quite useful when it comes to providing you with, you know, quite a good number of stamps. It's, I mean, I have a lot of stamps, but then I do a lot of stamping, and I do a lot of, I make cards, I make the journals obviously, so, you know, I'm not suggesting that anybody needs to go out and buy a ton of stamps or anything like that. What I'm saying is it's a handy thing to have. Now the other thing is, not all of your stamps need to be as they come, do you know what I mean? They don't need to be straight, they don't need to be reading left to right. You can, well, obviously you'll still need to, you can't make a reverse stamp, well you can, but that's another lesson for another day. But you can introduce little things like putting the stamp at the side, and it just adds another dimension to your work. Nothing needs to be tablet of stone here. We're literally making sure we provide ourselves with a suitable background, that if we want to come along and do something on top, oops, that's going to be, well, I don't suppose it really matters. If we want to come along and subsequently add something, we can. Now, I've done a reasonable job of filling that, but what I will do is I will use the distress ink to add some stamping to it, just to give it another dimension. Ordinarily I would be cleaning these stamps, but I very foolishly got ready to stamp without bringing over a baby wipe to do that. You can see that particular stamp there in the distress ink, it's very, very faint down the bottom. But again, it's all about adding layers. That's the whole crux of this. It's adding layers to your work, adding layers to your tag. If you've got see the likes of this, which is quite soft and bendy, if you want to make sure you get it straight, put it face down, or it's not going to be perfectly straight because I think I put it away squint the last time, but you can then pick it up with your, you know, if you put it down as if the side that you would be stamping on, facing down, you'll get it that way, and just add that. Again, we don't need to lean dead heavy on it, we just give it enough time to kiss the paper, so to speak, and it will leave its impression. You just give it long enough for the ink to move to the paper. I think I'll do this in brown down the bottom as well. A wee bit of a jaunty angle. Wait a minute, in fact I'll stamp it off because I don't want it to be, it's going to be quite a distinctive stamp. Happy with that. Right, so, wait a minute, I'm going to actually, I'll add it up the top and all. Right, that's going to do me, I think, one in terms of my background. So, if you have a wee look at the stamp, or the tag itself, that's what we've got. Wait till I find my trusty little tag to do my corners. If we introduce those, we can get our tag shape, and from here, just move those out the way. There's your basic tag. You can either leave that as it is. Obviously you'd come along, since I just used white card, you can distress the back using vintage photo or the likes, or maybe even just going over it with the pink again. So you can leave it as it is, or you could add a focal image, and that would be you. So that's it, using Tattered Rose, Distress Ink and Vintage Sepia for doing the majority of my stamping. We'll go on to the blue one now and have a wee look at that. Move that out the way. So first thing I want to do, find my tag, and I'll change my ink blending tool sponge and bring in my weathered wood. And we'll go over that to give it a wee bit of a background. Like I say, you bring it in. Now the weathered wood is a little darker than the, you can see one of the swirls I made there by accident. So, you know, I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'll be the first to admit that, especially with Distress Ink. Distress Ink's very unforgiving, and it's very, very easy to, I've made some smudgy brown fingerprints on it as well, just to finish off. But again, the whole thing is, it's distress. So I suppose, you know, you're not expecting it to look as if it's brand spanking new. The whole thing about the distress is that it gives everything a kind of aged look. And in this one I'm going to introduce my That's Crafty Dinky stencil. I love this wee stencil. It's quite small, so it's good size for using with likes of tags or even on a page, because I never make particularly big journals. I quite like things being small. So I'll add, and again I want to try and avoid the edges if I can, because although with this it doesn't matter quite so much because it is a straight pattern. Distress ink is washable when it comes to things like using stencils, and these wee pads can be washed and dried out obviously. They don't last forever, I have to say, but they're not overly expensive in the grand scheme of things. Right, so there you go, we've added that to start off our background. We'll get a text stamp, and I've got more than one text stamp, needless to say. I've got this, I really like this Latin stamp. See, the only problem I have with the Latin stamp is it's very difficult to see if it's the right way up or not. Right, so I'm going to use a bigger acrylic block because it's a bigger stamp. So put my stamp down, put my acrylic block on it. And I think this first impression, what we'll do is we'll actually use the Weathered Wood Distress Ink. I'm not looking to get a square, so I'm not overly fussed about making sure I stamp right to edges or anything like that. I'm looking to just basically get a bit of text down on this. and it doesn't need to be capable of being read. It is only providing a background. There we go, that will do for me. I'll put that away. You can tell the difference in the quality of stamps. They really, it's quite noticeable. This is a particularly good heavy stamp, so it's excellent quality. Right, now I've got some splats, that wee ink splats. I'll use a smaller stamping acrylic block here because I don't need a great big one. And we'll use the distress ink again and just basically add a little of the background. It's fine. I've got a stamp set here that came with text and some other wee ticket stamps. I'm going to use some of those again just to provide my background. And in this one it's I'm going to stamp it off first of all and then apply it and have it coming off my page. And do another one. There, hopefully you can see that okay. So that's just with the distress ink so far. Now I'm going to introduce another VersaFine ink. This time I'm going to use, because I'm using blue, I thought smoky grey would go quite well with it. I've got a big smoky grey because when I bought it, that was all that was out for sale. I broke the lid. It's not like me to break things, to be honest. I'm usually quite good at keeping stuff in a reasonable nick, but I managed to break the lid of this one, so what can you do? What can you do? Because it's a big pad, you've got to watch, because it's really easy to not so much overstamp your ink, but it's easy to get ink on other bits of your thingy, your acrylic block, and obviously if you're doing that, it may well show up. Doing that thing I told you not to do. You get a much lighter amount of ink on it if you take the ink to the pad. If you take the pad to the stamp, if you take the stamp to, oh gosh, I can't say this. If you take the stamp to the pad, you do, as I say, really run the risk of being a bit heavy-handed. Oh, that's 2 stamps, I thought it was 1. Right, we'll wait a minute, we'll do them one at a time. So I wonder why it was coming up on the one go. Back to me, won't even bother. I'll just a second impression. The other thing I like about this particular pad, now that's a wee bit long for this, the other thing I like about this particular stamp set rather, is you get a lot of dates in it, which again, when you're doing a lot of vintage stuff, really helps, because, you know, there's no harm done in having plenty of dates on whatever you're working on. Don't need to press too hard, you're only trying to get the ink onto the paper. The harder you press, the greater the risk of smudging everything, and you really don't want to smudge it if you can avoid it. It's a wee itty bitty stamp. This particular stamp is it's a funny one because it doesn't stamp terribly well. There is actually a background number on this, but you never saw it in my last impression, so let's see if I can get it this time. Oh, it's very vague. It says 375 right in the centre of it, but you can't really see it terribly well. But it's okay, because again, like I said, this is really just about backgrounds. Oh, gosh, they stick so well sometimes, and then other times they don't. Right, we'll double up and we'll do 2 stamps at one time here. Things will overlap, that's okay, because that's what we're aiming for. Somebody spotted a squirrel. I think we need don't need an awful lot more, I don't think, on this. I think we're doing okay. Help if I put my stamps back in the right place. They might all fit then. Right, I think that'll do us on the stamping front. So we'll find our trusty brown tag to cut off our edges. And the other thing to remember, I mean, I'm doing this with a tag, but this can be adapted to use with either card making, you know, for a background for any card, or it can be used even on a page of a junk journal. So there you go, and what we'll do is you can have a look at what that would look like with a focal image. And that would be it. So that's for tags. I hope you found that useful. We'll be doing more stamping in the next one, and then we'll move on to collage of items, or we'll use stamping and collage items ultimately to show you what you can do with layers. So thanks very much for your time. I hope you found it useful. Please leave any comments you like. Do the thumbs up thing, and make sure you subscribe. And if you think there's anyone you know that would benefit from finding out about how to do the stamping, highlight the video to them, and get me thousands of subscribers, because I want to be dead famous. Thanks very much for your time. I'll see you all again very, very soon. Bye guys, bye.